Okay, we're done with patterns and lofting and all of that sort of stuff, so now it is time to get onto construction, and that starts with a shopping trip to my local hardwood supplier. This is Westwind Hardwoods. It's a little family-owned business. I've been coming to them for about 25 years, and what I really like about these guys is they not only know about boat building, they do some boat building themselves, they know what I'm after, why I'm after it, and they can direct me to the stuff that I really need. These guys keep a wide variety of all kinds of stuff on hand. We've got a lot of shorts of Pacific yew wood here, that's our local species. And then all around the back of the yard here, we've got lots and lots of slabs of Gary oak and Douglas fir. Gary oak is our local species as well. It's a white oak, but it doesn't get milled up into stuff that's useful to me as a boat builder, unfortunately. A lot of the time it gets bucked into firewood or it gets turned into big slabs sometimes. Up top we got some long ash for canoe gunnels there. It's usually 16 to 20 feet long. And then it looks like a big pile of yellow cedar. And then over here, looks like down at the bottom of this stack is some arbutus. And down at the bottom of the stack is where it should stay, because that stuff takes forever to cure, and when it does, you're lucky if it doesn't corkscrew on you. And there's some heavy timbers in there. Could be a variety of stuff. Could be some purple heart, some Douglas fir. And here we got some ipe little 2x2s. These guys stock a pile of ipe that's intended for making decks and things like that. Some of it's already pre-shaped. So let's go inside and have a look at what's in there. This place is pretty small, but it holds quite a lot of stuff. Over here we've got a big rack of sapele. This is always well supplied, always a lot of long lengths and good widths on hand. So here's a little custom processing job of some red cedar here, and take a look at the color on this stuff. It's always really interesting how cedar can do this once in a while. So we're going to be using an Okume plywood made by Gilbert, and you can see the sheets we're going to use here. The face veneer is a little bit rough in spots. It wouldn't look very good under varnish, but luckily we're going to paint it inside and out, so this is going to work out just fine. Westwind always has a pretty interesting variety of locally cut stuff. You can see some cedar there. I think we went by some maple a moment ago. And here we've got some tight knot white pine. So we're going to be using this stuff for all of our battens and molds. Now I wanted to use Douglas fir for that stuff, but the Douglas fir is quite high in price right now. It's about $10 a board foot. And I hate the idea of turning that kind of material into little skinny battens that are essentially disposable. So the white pine will work just fine for us. So over here we have some white oak. Now we're going to be using this for our in-wales and out-wales and decks and thwart risers and all that sort of stuff. And of course our false bottom. I don't have a lot to pick and choose from in here, so we're going to have to hope that we can find the stuff we need. So here's our material that we've picked out. We've got a bunch of pine, we've got a bunch of oak. So I'm going to take care of paying for this, and then we'll go load it up. Okay, here's our last piece of oak. Get them to split it down the middle and dress it down for us. And this is going to be the sacrificial shoe for our boat. So I would have used narrower stuff, like 3 pieces of narrower stuff, but they didn't have anything that was going to do the job, actually. Everything was a bit gamey, so we'll make it out of 2 pieces, and that should be fine. So these guys came in at, oh, I'm going to call that 5/16, which is just about perfect, I'd say. Not crazy heavy, but it's going to take a lot of years to wear through that. So that's going to be great. It turned out really, really nicely. Better than I expected, actually. Okay, so here we go. What did this run us? 1,200 bucks? No, 1,120 bucks. 125 a sheet for the plywood. And I got a good price on the yoke, actually, $7.50 a board foot, so that's good. I got sort of a eyeball quote of 10 bucks when I started out there talking, and I paid $2 a board foot for the pine, which is fantastic, especially this wide, 12-inch wide stuff, 16 feet long. Can't complain about that. And so I think the reason that the pine is as economical as it is, despite the lumber prices, is because this stuff isn't graded for construction use. So we don't pay that surcharge that the building industry is having to pay. Okay, whenever I have a particularly heavy load, I try and triangulate my straps on the racks here just to stiffen them up a little bit. You know, it only does so much, but it does something. And of course, don't forget to flag your load. We don't need anybody taking a header into that stuff. All right, let's go. Time to head home. Keys, where the hell are the damn keys? Always losing my keys. Hey, Mark from Nomad Boatbuilding. Welcome back to the shop. Now today on the Catalina Wherry project, we are going to build the plank keel. This is a plywood keel. It's about 16 inches wide on the bottom. This is going to be the backbone of our boat, and it's really the first piece of the whole boat that we're going to construct. And let's get right down to it. Throughout history, craftsmen have been using body parts as a unit of reference when they're building things. They might use their foot, their hand, their arm span to determine the size of a table or the size of a chair or the size of a box or whatever. Now, societies developed and craftsmen began needing to coordinate their efforts to build something collectively. Of course, they found that each of them using their own hand, foot, arm span as a unit of measure didn't work if everybody's got different sized body parts. So somebody said, let's find a consistent unit of measure. In many cases, they would have the king or the leader step on a stick, record the length of his foot, and that would become the basis for their unit of measure. Now that is something that we call a story pole. And you've used a story pole yourself. A tape measure is a story pole. Now in boat building, so much of our design happens on our lofting. A lofting is a great tool, but it is a rather inconvenient thing to carry around the shop in order to pull the dimensions off of. Now I do make some mylar patterns, and that's awfully useful, but another great way to take information off your lofting and have it transferable to the materials you're going to build with is using story poles. Today we're going to build the keel for the Catalina Wherry, and we're going to use story poles to pull the information off of the lofting. I've got my body plan here. And essentially I'm marking a center line onto a stick, and then from there I can mark the width of my keel at each of the stations, and I can carry that information over to the plywood that I'm going to be building from. Now I can make a story pole for the widths for both the inside and outside of the keel, and I can also record the spacing of those stations that is laid down on the lofting. The size and the shape of the keel is derived from the lofting without any numerical mistakes possibly screwing things up. So on this stick I have everything I need to lay out my keel, except for station spacing, which is on this stick that came off of our lofting. In order to use this piece of plywood efficiently, I need to nest my keel pieces off to one side, and then that will yield enough material on the other side for my transom. Now the downside of this is I'm going to have some very oddball shaped pieces of plywood to work with for the next little bit. Now of course the only trick to this method is that you're going to have to glue up your scarf lining up along a center line, but that's not really difficult to do. You can just simply lay a string line on your glue up bench between one end and the other and just juggle it all underneath that string line until it's lined up straight. I've done that many times. It's really not a problem. Now in retrospect, I realize I would have actually saved a whole bunch of time if I had taken a moment to make some door skin patterns of my bottom off of the lofting. Now that I look at myself going through the process of breaking down this sheet and the amount of time I spent screwing around with straight edges and string lines and things like that trying to find the right way to nest these two together, I would have saved a lot of time by just making out those little pieces out of door skin and then using them to lay out this sheet for this breakdown process. Then I could also use it again for the layout process after they're scarfed. And now out of this portion, I'm going to get my transom. Now, a power plane is a tool that is no doubt very, very helpful, but it's one that I absolutely loathe using. It's just got such a loud and obnoxious sound. And my power plane used to work great until I was working on a bowsprit for somebody. Loaned the plane to the person that I was working with at the moment, and I don't know what he did to it, but he must have cranked down on that adjusting handle quite a bit, because it has never worked the same since. It just will not hold its position, and so I'm constantly having to adjust the depth of cut. It just kind of walks its way loose as I'm cutting it. It drives me absolutely crazy. Okay, this is about the point that I usually break away from the power planer. I just never can get a good feel for those things. I mean, I've tried and tried and tried, but I just find them really awkward to try and to judge where your bottom is. At least the one I have, I can't dial it into a point where I feel comfortable not biting in. So I usually stop about 1.5 veneers from the edge and just switched over to a hand plane. And frankly, I think it's plenty fast with a hand plane. It's a little ugly doing plywood compared to solid wood with a hand plane, but you start with a good coarse bite. Make sure that you're waxed up. There we go. Of course, I can just feel that I'm going to smash the plane into this clamp over here. I just feel it. Get that out of the way. Not sure if I can fit it down here safely. And better not. I've got a smaller one now. Of course, now the big trick is to make sure that you don't go working this feather edge down here like bejesus without dealing with it back here. Because if this is too high, it's going to be driving your plane at too steep an angle. So you're better off trying to work the whole surface as much as possible. Move this guy back a little too. Nothing hurts more than smashing your body parts into a clamp with a plane in the way. All right. Once you have this last veneer down to your line, that means you're done with that back end. I'm just about there in a couple of spots. You can use it as a guide to make sure you get the rest of it right. Just got to make sure you don't go and eat that up. There we go, all the way across there. There's just a couple little spots where it's not quite to that line, so I've got to be really careful that I don't hit that line at this point. I could even take like a crayon or a pencil and we'll scrub that down, try and avoid hitting it. And going in all the different diagonal directions, more than just giving you a workout, is a good way to help make sure you're trying to keep everything flat. You're not tending a big cup into it or anything. Of course, you're watching your veneers the whole time and trying to maintain relatively straight looking veneers. It's not a guarantee that these are 100%, but they're not too far off. Use them as a general guide. So right now I'm just starting to cut into my last veneer on the top sheet at the feather edge. And it's actually getting hard to get the plane to bite. I've got a fairly light cut on the plane iron. It's probably a good indication I should probably stop and sharpen, although it's pulling off some pretty nice shavings. almost there. I think this last veneer has only got like a, I'm almost all the way through it. I'm gonna stop and just grab an abrasive to try and finish this off. Now if you're afraid of eating up that feather edge, and you really don't want to take it down till it's 0 thickness, that's fine. But when you do your glue up, you just got to make sure that you separate your two surfaces just a tiny bit. Maybe do a dry fit and then check it with a straight edge. Make sure those two surfaces are coplanar. Of course, we take our plane, use the sole just to check that we're nice and flat. You want a light from behind you to check that. I check it and I do 2 diagonals. If anything, we want a slight hollow. Check it this way. It's good. What we don't want is a hump. Hump is bad. Hollow is just fine. So I even sometimes purposefully put a slight hollow in. I'll get it dead flat, and then I'll come along with like a smoothing plane or a block plane, or even just an abrasive pad, and just kind of hollow it out just a hair. You actually have to be careful you don't slice your hands open when you're handling these guys. It's that sharp. She's done. Now I think to the first time boat builder, scarfing is the #1 most intimidating job they're going to have to tackle. Now I want you to know that you do not need to get as fussy as I do when you're scarfing. You don't need to have a power planer. You don't need to have a plane sharpened up to be able to take transparent shavings off. Now when I first got going on boat building, I was building one of my very first boats. I had a next door neighbor who watched me build, and he decided to build the exact same one that I was building. He did not have the same skills or tools that I had, but he managed to get his boat built in a reasonable amount of time, and he did all of the fine shaping, that is the beveling of everything, and his scarves using a drywaller's rasp, just like this. Not a pretty tool, but perfectly functional for creating the surfaces that we need to do good quality epoxy construction. They don't need to be glass smooth. In fact, it's better if they aren't glass smooth. We want a little tooth to them. All a good scarf needs is that you use a long enough ratio of a minimum of 6:1, and you make sure that when you do the glue up that your joints are nice and coplanar across the surface of the material, and you use a thickened epoxy in the joint to make up for any voids that you might have in there. That's the most important thing. You do that, you're going to come out with a perfectly functional scarf. Okay, I'm ready to start gluing up my keel plank here, and just doing a dry glue up. I lucked out with these 4-foot F-body clamps. They catch my rafters, my ceiling joists, floor joists, whatever you want to call them. And it's one of the few times I'm thankful of a low ceilinged workshop is when I need to clamp off of the ceiling or fasten something to the ceiling. So there's a lot of times I curse at it, and then a lot of times I'm happy about it because I got a lot of stuff stored up there. Anyway, so I've got my panel set up. I've got the one side is clamped down firmly right now, and the other side is floating. However, I've put little finishing nails into the table that locate where this is going to go, and I'm pulled back from my glue line about 1/8 of an inch, and that is pretty common. And the reason for that is we need some room for the glue. If we sneak right up on that line, guaranteed you're going to end up either with a starved glue joint, or you're going to end up with one of these sheets being a little bit proud. So it is standard practice to haul back from that line just a little bit. If you want to sneak up on it like right tight because it's going to show or something like that, you need to really make sure you're hollowing out your scarf in order to allow for that material to be in there. So anyhow, I don't need to worry about that. I'm perfectly happy pulling back from the joint a little bit. This is all going to get glassed over on one side, and it's going to get a false bottom on the other side, so it's all going to get buried. But it looks really good here. It's a nice scarf joint. And so now I'm just going to get ready for my wet out. Okay, here's a suggestion for you. West Systems user manual. If you are a West System user, as I am, this thing is gold, and it's got a lot of really useful information. And one of the things it has in it is it tells you what the mixed volume is of epoxy kits, like if you mix the whole thing together. And so what I do is I take that number and I calculate out what it costs per shot of epoxy. And when I say a shot, it's like a pump for this one and a pump of that one, and you mix them together. That's one shot. So what I do is I take that full volume of epoxy and I divide out how many pumps am I going to get out of a full kit, and then I calculate out how much it's costing me per pump. Not that I'm trying to be a penny pincher, but because I think it's really good for you to sort of have it in your head how much money you're spending on epoxy as you're using it, because it might affect how you want to use it. There's this incentive to sort of smear epoxy on everything, or you might think, I'm going to encapsulate this boat, I'm just going to put epoxy on everything. Well, I want you to think about exactly how much that actually costs, because it's not insignificant, right? So this joint is probably going to be like $2 for the epoxy to fill that joint. There's going to be another $2 or $3 of epoxy to fill the space between those transoms, roughly. So that doesn't seem like much, but how about when we're glassing, right? Suddenly if I'm glassing a boat, I'm probably mixing up, 20, 30, 40, 50 pumps of epoxy in order to fill out the first coat of glass. And then I'm going to go half that for the next coat, half that for the next coat. And so by the time you add it up, you've put a fair bit of material into that boat. Did you need to fiberglass it? Was it really important to do that? Did you need to fiberglass the whole thing? Maybe you only need to fiberglass a bit of it. We are using a bunch of chemical goo, and I don't really like using chemical goo that much. It has its place. It's very, very useful, but we don't need to use it everywhere. So maybe if you think about how much it costs on that micro level, you'll be less inclined to smear it all over the place. So that's just a little tip, but the manual has got a ton of other useful stuff in there. So make sure you pick up a copy. Even if you're not a West System user, it's got just a lot of good information just about general epoxy use, period. So even if you're using System 3 or Mass or whatever, total boat, there's going to be good information in all the West System material because these guys have been at it for a long, long time. Okay, well, let's get gluing. Okay, here's my paint and epoxy room. So I keep all the bits and bobs I need for mixing up epoxy in here. Mixing cups, stir sticks, brushes, fillers, all that good stuff. So I'm just going to start by mixing up a few shots of unthickened epoxy just to get started here. And I always go resin first and then hardener. Let's see what we got. Used any of this slow for a while. Let's use up some of this stuff before it gets too old. Get the pump going. It's always good to have a dribble pot underneath your epoxy. 1. It's 2. 2. So, mixing wand on a drill, and I find a close quarter drill is easier to use just because you're a little closer to your pot. I don't know what it is about the geometry of it works better. Now you're supposed to be mixing your epoxy for 2 minutes, 2 full minutes by hand. So I figure with the wand on here, I cut it down to between 30 seconds and 1 minute. In fact, I could probably cut it down to 20 or 30 seconds given how much faster I'm mixing. But I like to play it cautious. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to just grab a squeegee for spreading this around. Just use a little one. Okay. So first I'm going to slip this out of its position and flip it over. When you got larger surfaces to coat, I think it's worthwhile just squeegeeing the epoxy on. It's just a little bit faster. There we go. We're just going to cover our joint. I probably mixed up enough epoxy for the whole glue up here. Actually, I'm glad I used the slow hardener. I choose my hardener depending on the extent of the glue up I want to do. Obviously, if it's a long, complicated process, I'll even use the 207 special coatings hardener because it's the slower of the ones. I don't bother carrying the tropical hardener. Never bothered. Should check it out someday though, maybe. Okay, I got about a 50-50 mix of colloidal silica and wood flour mixed to about a jam consistency here. And we'll go for, well, this trowel's a bit gunked up. So I'll go with like a medium comb out here, I think. Should be fine. I'd go for a fine, except that my fine looks like it's practically filled. Okay, and then I'm going to put a little more on the other side. You really only need to do one side here, but I think it never hurts to have a little bit extra. Okay, well, that ought to do it. Need a cloth to clean up my hands, and then we'll flip the panel here. See, that one thing I forgot. It slowed me up there. One thing I forgot. The rag and the alcohol. Okay, so this flips over. And we've got some finishing nails driven right into the bench that are going to control its position. Beautiful. Very nice. Okay. Okay, so let's get a clamp on here. One on here. Now I'm not clamping the bejesus out of this, just moderate pressure. Not trying to lift the whole house. Despite having done clamp ups like this dozens of times, I decided it was time to get more efficient. And with the simplest addition to my bench, I was able to speed things right up. I just added a single block to the backsplash, a wedge, a curved clamping caul, and a single clamp, and I was able to speed this job up 3 times. Well, we've got our keel plank glued up here. Let's pull it apart and see how we did. This is always a little bit of a nail biter. This is pretty darn straightforward. However, it does have a large gluing surface, so getting that volume of epoxy just right is the trick. And I have to say I am guilty of kind of overdoing it much of the time, and so it'd be nice to see if I underdid it for once, or rather, it'd be nice to see that I got it just right. I think I did. Let's see. Ah, nice. Okay, I got a little slight void right at the feather edge there, which is super annoying. It doesn't really matter for my purposes, though. It's not going to affect me at all because we'll get glassed over. It'll get covered over one way or the other, so that's not a problem. But that's nice. Just a little bit of squeeze out, a little feathering. Now the question is, are we as lucky on the other side? And the back side is perfect. We're ready to relay out our shape on here, spring a batten, and cut her out. So I've got one line on here so far, and a finishing nail popped in against that just to be able to feel for it. Stretch out the string and just walk it over until I just touch that guy, and right there. Yeah, that looks good. When I did my glue up, because I was having to shift this a little bit, I erased my station lines that I had on the other panel. And that's because they were going to end up being out of whack with the layout. So now, let's see. This is my stern. Decision to make, which way to point the boat. Normally, I always build boats, or have in the past, with the bow pointing towards the door. And when I'm doing kayaks, I do exactly that. But for plank boats, I tend to point them the other way. And the only reason for that is the table saw creates a choke point, and I want the smallest portion of the boat up here at the choke point. And just the way I loft, I always have the boats pointing to the right, and I always loft the boats with my back to this wall, so it ends up with the bow pointing to the right. And I know it's stupid because I could just turn everything 90 degrees and change all of that. But I don't know. You know, you get into these silly habits, and sometimes you just got to roll with that, because now it just helps me to think about what I'm doing. And if I flip things around now, it's just going to screw me up in a different way. So we'll flip this around. Okay, we're going to open the door. We're going to flip this around. Okay. Lay our batten back out here. 7, 6, 5, good. And 4. 3, 2, and 1. We're just going to terminate this right on 1. My pencil is not sharp enough. This plane's needs a sharpening because it's having trouble sharpening a pencil. That's always a good good test for your planes. Okay, so I need to square off of those lines. If you wanted to, you could just square in one direction, and then after you mark your point, you could triangulate that point using dividers if you wanted to, which seems like a big pain in the butt, but it's just if you're a real junkie for geometry, you could do that. Okay, now I've got my story pole for the bottom, and I've marked my inside and outside dimensions on here. And by doing that, I can lay them both out on the same side. So I have the bottom facing up right now, I believe. Yes. And I can mark both my lines on this one side. And if I cut like right to the line on the inside face, then I just need to worry about beveling off to the outside face of the bottom, all on this one side, basically. I could do that. So we'll start with that. So I'm basically going to be laying out 2 sets of lines on here. The inside and the outside. And I'm not flipping it over here to mark these, I'm just shifting and marking off the center line when I do the opposite sides of them, which works just fine if you can keep your head in the game on that front. Okay, now we've got our batten on here, and we're just gonna Pop some nails outside of it, tag it in place. Sometimes you're kind of close on the edge of your plywood here. You have to get clever, use a weight or something like that. Now everything should pretty much land right where it ought to be. If it doesn't, you should probably be checking your lofting. Like right here, I got a slight, for some reason what is this, mold number 3? This is like springing farther out than I would like it. I'm going to quickly pop over to my lofting and just make sure that the number I have on here is correct, because that's a little out of whack. Like I can pull it in and it kind of works out okay, I guess. But it doesn't work out great. And maybe it's number 2. I mean, if number 3 works well, then maybe number 2 here is out of whack. And this is the stuff that should be resolved on the lofting, to be perfectly honest. Or maybe it's just a question of splitting the difference between the two. If I do that, maybe that's the best answer. But I'm just going to check the lofting because that's bothering me. My marks are all correct on the lofting, so I'm not quite sure what to account for the discrepancy here when I line it out in this location. So what I decided to do is I'm going to fudge it. Fudging station number 3 out a little bit, fudging station number 2 in just a hair, and fudging station 1 out a bit. And between the 3, the line looks pretty fair. Worst case scenario, you take a little bit more off here or there. It'd be easy to take more off at 1, so in fact I could fudge that one out just a hair more, I think. We'll do that. And fingers crossed it all works out just fine. So I just got to make sure that, give myself a note there, that I should swing that dimension over to the other side as well. Ultimately, we got to fair this all in on the mold, so if there's a bit of wiggle room anyway, that's not a problem. I got to put a little bit of wiggle room into it just to make sure it fares in properly. Okay, so now I will do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll do the next series of marks inboard of that. In case it hasn't been clear, we're drawing 2 sets of lines. One set is the one that we're going to cut to, and it represents the inboard face of the bottom. The other set we're going to bevel to, and it represents the outboard face of the bottom. If your line isn't fair, I guarantee there will be trouble. If you look closely at our scarf here, it worked out really quite nicely. Sight down it, you can actually see how all the veneer lines line up almost perfectly, and that's even though I pulled back from that surface by that like a full generous 1/8 of an inch. So it's kind of interesting how that works out. But anyhow, that looks nice, and there's like there's a thin glue line here. I mean, that's really what makes up for this gap, is that glue line, which, I can't measure it exactly. You'd have to use calipers to do it. but it's not zero, and we don't want it to be zero. We want a little bit of meat in there. We want glue in there is what we want, and that's what we get when we get the proper glue up job where we don't squeeze it all out. So that's going to make it good and strong. In fact, if I try breaking this, let's give it a shot. Ah! Yep, that did not remotely break anywhere close to the scarf line. If anything, I'll bet you anything it was stronger where that scarf is. I'll bet it would break easier elsewhere. Let's see. Yep, that was way easier to break. The scarf added strength to that, like a measurable amount. So that's kind of interesting. Scarfing, not such a bad thing. So I cleaned up my cuts. I just did a little bit of work, just kind of licking those sides right down to my saw line. And I was riding that saw really, really close to that pencil line. I want to glass the inside of this, the part that'll be the inside of the boat, before it goes on the mold. So, but I'm just debating now whether or not to start beveling off this side a little bit, or whether to leave it till it's on the mold to do that. I'm very much torn. So I could knock the bevels off now, at least some of it, and then there's less to do on the boat where it's might be at a more inconvenient height. Oh, so difficult to decide. And right now I have no interest in pulling out a power plane or anything. And I don't know if I even want to tackle this just, I mean, it's not that much wood. When you get right down to it, just tackle it with a smoothing plane. Let's give it a taste. Yeah, maybe I'll knock a chunk off. A little bit less to do when it's a bit more awkward in its height. Just got to clamp this down. Yeah, I'll do that for a bit. I'm thinking, never done this before. Plywood with a slick? I don't know. Let's find out. Let's find out. Right about now, I'm feeling like I could do this all day long. This is working real nice. Anyhow, beveling off the edge was pretty relatively straightforward. Obviously, working using the slick for doing that, which I've never done on plywood, worked great. Of course, your slick has got to be sharp to do it, and your angle of attack certainly has an influence on it. You got to make sure you're going a bit downhill with it. But it worked really nicely. You know, took off the meat pretty quickly, quietly, which I like. And you know, following it up with the plane, cleaned it up pretty quickly, even though it's got a few humps and valleys from the slick, but the plane just smooths that right out. So I've left everything sort of strong by what is probably a fat 1/8 of an inch or so in depth. And that's so that when I get it on the mold, I've got plenty of room to adjust the angle if I've screwed something up. Hopefully I haven't, fingers crossed. But you should always sort of build a little bit of wiggle room into your project anyway. So, flip this over, I'm going to glass it. I'm not going to do that on the camera. And then we'll move on to other parts. All right, well, catch you all next time, and keep your stick on the ice.